Star Wars had defined blockbuster entertainment since 1977, creating a cultural phenomenon that escaped Hollywood and had taken over the entire world. George Lucas's space opera had spawned sequels, merchandise, books, video games, an entire expanded universe, and would become the highest-grossing film for half a decade. Empire Strikes Back was one of those sequels that most certainly lived up to, if not exceeded, the hype, and while Return of the Jedi was a bit of a come-down, it was still an excellent movie and a good way to end the series. For the decade and a half afterwards, Star Wars existed in books, toys, and the imagination, transforming into an industry unto itself. Then, in the 90s, rumblings began that George Lucas was considering returning to the universe with another film. It was something that fans had always wanted, and I'm sure that Lucas himself knew that whatever he would come up with had no shot of living up to the story that the fans had created in their heads. That might be part of the reason that it took 6 years for it to hit the big screen after it was officially announced in October of 1993 that he was working on it. He began writing it in November of 1994. Excitement for the movies was so high that it actually boosted ticket sales for 1998's Meet Joe Black, one of the first films to carry the Phantom Menace trailer. People would buy a ticket, see the trailer, and then not even stick around for the rest of the movie. When the trailer was released on the official website on the nascent internet, it got more than 1 million downloads on its first day, an impressive number for the time. When the movie actually came out, it apparently resulted in around $300 million of lost productivity as people called out sick to watch the movie. Media coverage was constant, and the film's release was treated as a cultural event. And then the movie came out. As Douglas Adams wrote in the beginning of The Restaurant at the End of the Universe, quote, "This has made a lot of people very angry and been widely regarded as a bad move," end quote. The first reviews out of the gate were tepid at best. The Los Angeles Daily News said it was pretty good, while Todd McCarthy at Variety said it was, quote, "neither captivating nor transporting, for it lacks any emotional pull, as well as the sense of wonder at all that marks the best works of sci-fi and fantasy," end quote. But then there was the fan reaction, or rather the fan backlash, because the people that had waited with bated breath for the movie were not happy. A small portion was, to say the least, apoplectic. The issues were myriad. First, there was the wooden dialogue and acting. Now, to be fair, this has been a critique of Star Wars since the beginning, and even Lucas calls his dialogue writing mediocre. Then, Jar Jar Binks caught plenty of flack as someone annoying rather than endearing. The same for young Jake Lloyd's portrayal of a young Anakin, which earned an unreasonable amount of hate and spite. Fans felt that it lacked wonder and adventure, which abounded in the original trilogy. Fans also didn't like the focus put on the political machinations over character development. Hell, the opening crawl reads in part, quote, "The taxation of trade routes to outlying star systems is in dispute," end quote. The movie is literally predicated on tariffs. In an amusing Guardian piece from Jack Bernhardt in April of 2025, he wrote that the most terrifying thing, quote, "the thing that has made me truly believe that we are living in the end times is a panic-inducing realization. The Phantom Menace just might have been right all along," end quote. None of this stopped the movie from becoming a juggernaut at the box office, of course, but word of mouth was notably cooler than the box office suggested. Fans felt betrayed by what they found to be a misunderstanding of what made Star Wars special from its very own creator. Attack of the Clones suffered a drop in the box office, but Revenge of the Sith helped reclaim the reputation of the prequel trilogy. The Phantom Menace's legacy is complex, serving as both a cautionary tale about the dangers of excessive hype and how franchises approach fan expectations. The film's problems influenced Lucas's approach to the subsequent prequels and eventually contributed to his decision to sell Lucasfilm to Disney. It became a cultural reference point for discussing disappointing sequels and the challenges of reviving beloved properties. It's undergone some rehabilitations with audiences since the release of the sequel trilogy, but The Phantom Menace still remains emblematic of how even the most anticipated films can fail to recap. 1993's Jurassic Park was a revolutionary film, a hallmark of blockbuster filmmaking, a revolution in CGI technology, and utterly imbued with that Spielberg magic. It's no wonder that it was, at one time, the highest-grossing film ever made. Narratively, it explored scientific hubris, corporate greed, a genuine desire from someone like the movie version of Hammond to want to bring joy to others, humanity's relationship with the past, present, future, and their environment, and more. The Lost World and Jurassic Park 3 were both eagerly anticipated, but both would leave audiences disappointed. Neither of them would bring all of the characters back. They were, at best, patchwork efforts to recapture the Spielberg magic, and while The Lost World had its moments, on the whole, both failed to do so. It makes sense, then, that 2015's Jurassic World was so eagerly anticipated. It had been more than a decade since Jurassic Park 3 was released, and people were looking forward to going back to Jurassic Park. A new audience had emerged by then, and so it makes sense to also shake up the cast. Bryce Dallas Howard and Chris Pratt were brought in, and they did a decent enough job. Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom took it a step further. Dinosaurs were taken off the island and brought to the mainland, where they spread rapidly. It was supposed to be a setup for Jurassic World Dominion, perhaps one of the most disappointing movies ever made. The return of Sam Neill, Laura Dern, and Jeff Goldblum generated enormous nostalgia-driven excitement among fans who had grown up with these characters. Marketing emphasized the film's exploration of a world where dinosaurs coexisted with modern civilization, promising to deliver on the setup established by Fallen Kingdom. The promotional campaign positioned the movie as the ultimate Jurassic experience, bringing together 6 films worth of storytelling into one climactic adventure. Dominion would end up being the worst reviewed of the entire franchise. For some godforsaken reason, the movie really emphasized giant locusts, which sometimes seemed to be more of a star than the dinosaurs themselves. There was barely any interaction between dinosaurs and people in the real world, and next to zero focus on the coexistence that Ian Malcolm implies at the end of Fallen Kingdom. It utterly failed to deliver on the central concept, eventually retreating to an isolated location for action sequences that were recycled from prior movies. The reunion of the original cast was criticized as superficial fan service that added little to the character's development for the overall story. To be sure, it made $1 billion worldwide, but it just barely got over it when it should have been a slam dunk. But word of mouth was pretty negative. It's just that there are literally no other good dinosaur movies out there, and dinosaurs are cool as hell, so you have a pretty stalwart audience. Dominion was a disappointing conclusion to the trilogy, demonstrating that commercial success can often mask creative failure. Relying on nostalgia or the idea of a concept isn't enough. You need to deliver. Jurassic World Rebirth was a better movie than Dominion, though that's not really saying much. Still, as an optimist, I hope the Jurassic movies can capture the magic of the original going forward. Avatar: The Last Airbender had achieved something rare in modern entertainment, a children's animated series that appealed equally to adults through sophisticated storytelling, complex character development, and thoughtful world building. The Nickelodeon series ran from 2005 to 2008, earning critical acclaim and a devoted fanbase that praised its handling of themes like war, spirituality, and personal growth. And, as a fan of Tolkien, the show had some phenomenal world building, which is pretty much a prerequisite to get such a devoted following. When a live-action version was announced, there was plenty of excitement, though probably a fair amount of apprehension as well. After all, most people want to see their favorite show or book get turned into a big-budget movie. But when it was announced that M. Night Shyamalan was attached to direct the live-action adaptation, it probably shocked a lot of people. After all, this is a guy that's known for doing thriller-adjacent films that ended with a twist, something that he became a meme for. He also mostly did low-budget and mid-budget films. Tackling a $150 million budget special effects lad movie was a bit much, wasn't it? Yes, it was. Problems were apparent when the studio removed the whole Avatar part from the name because they didn't want people confusing it with James Cameron's Avatar, which came out in 2009, just a year prior. Being forced to literally change your identity is probably not the best opening gambit. Then there was the casting. Fans hated the race swapping. Dev Patel as Prince Zuko, Noah Ringer as Aang, Nicola Peltz as Katara, Jackson Rathbone as Sokka, and so on. It's like having John Wayne play Genghis Khan or Benedict Cumberbatch play Khan Noonien Singh in Star Trek Into Darkness, both of which are actual things that happen. What could have been an easy win, proper casting, was a spiral into disaster. Never mind just getting the casting wildly wrong. They couldn't even get the names right. Aang was pronounced as Ong. Iroh became Iro. It's like there was a fundamental disconnect between the movie that people wanted to see and the one that Shyamalan, an otherwise decent filmmaker, wanted to make. His movie would strip away the humor, character development, and emotional resonance of the show, opting for special effects that ended up being pretty bad. The movie made $320 million at the box office, which seems decent until you consider that the production budget was $150 million and the marketing budget was $130 million. Paramount owns Nickelodeon, so they were on the hook for a huge chunk of both of those. The movie got universally negative reviews, with an especially scathing one from Roger Ebert. Quote, "The Last Airbender is an agonizing experience in every category I can think of, and others still waiting to be invented. The laws of chance suggest that something should have gone right. Not here. It puts a nail in the coffin of low-rent 3D, but it will need a lot more coffins than that." End quote. A planned trilogy was reasonably cancelled. Netflix has since adapted the animation into a series, which has better reviews than the movie, though that's not really saying much. 2022's Thor: Love and Thunder takes the cake for being my biggest cinematic letdown, perhaps ever. I was a big fan of 2017's Thor Ragnarok, directed by Taika Waititi. It pulled in concepts from one of my favorite comics, Planet Hulk, and was a genuinely well put together movie that mixed drama, comedy, stakes, and set up for the Avengers movies that would round out that era of the MCU. So when I saw the first trailers for Thor Love and Thunder, I was pretty stoked to see where the story would go. Maybe it would be an interesting crossover between Thor and Guardians of the Galaxy. Maybe it would be some kind of planetary adventure. Maybe Christian Bale as Gore the God Butcher would be an interesting, compelling villain, something that the MCU seemed to have trouble with. Sure, there'll be some comedy, but hey, that's the MCU. How wrong I was. The film, for me, ended up being a major disappointment, though that seems to be the minority opinion if reviews are anything to go by. The film doubled down on the irreverence to an annoying degree. Screaming goats, endless quips, and inability to let a serious moment stand. Sure, it had two heavy threads, Jane Foster's cancer and Gore the God Butcher's grief-fueled crusade. In theory, that blend could have produced a bittersweet space opera. In practice, the joke-first rhythm kept bouncing the audience out of the drama just as it threatened to land. It's like they were afraid of making a good movie. The Guardians are done away with after the first few minutes. Christian Bale's Gore epitomizes the film's missed opportunity. His introduction hints at a mythic, almost horror-tinged antagonist, skeletal, whispering, unsettling. But he's pushed to the edge by side gags and detours that interrupt any momentum. Natalie Portman's turn as Mighty Thor has similar whiplash. The idea is powerful, but the movie often undercuts her arc with zingers right when sincerity is needed. It was a meandering movie punctuated by the screeches of billy goats. Richard Roeper called it, quote, one of the goofiest and least consequential sagas in MCU history, an allegedly wild and wacky, but ultimately disappointing and disjointed chapter in the ongoing story of the God of Thunder, who seems to get more clueless with each passing movie, end quote. And of it, Hemsworth said, quote, I think we just had too much fun. It just became too silly. It's always hard being in the center of it and having any real perspective. I love the process, it's always a ride, but you just don't know how people are going to respond, end quote. It's a disappointment because it's weightless where it most needed gravity. The lesson isn't no jokes in superhero movies. It's that you can go overboard, and it's at the cost of the film. With a steadier hand on pacing, fewer detours, and room for Gore and Jane to breathe, the same ingredients could have worked. Instead, it's a discordant mess. 2007 Spider-Man 3, directed by Sam Raimi, might have been one of the most eagerly anticipated movies of the 2000s. The first two movies were massive hits, critically and commercially, and helped raise the bar for what a superhero movie could be. Spider-Man 3 arrived in the afterglow of Spider-Man 2, which many considered to be the gold standard for superhero storytelling at the time. Anticipation was enormous, with fans eager to see the introduction of fan-favorite characters like Venom and the resolution of various plot threads from the previous films. The marketing campaign promised the biggest Spider-Man adventure yet, featuring multiple villains and spectacular action sequences. It was the epic conclusion to Raimi's trilogy with an epic budget to match its epic scope. Alas, it was an epic disappointment. Spider-Man 3 got mixed reviews from critics and bad reviews from audiences. An overstuffed plot and tonal inconsistencies were major problems. This was a movie with a lot going on. Multiple villains, multiple character arcs, multiple threads and plot lines. It was impossible to give proper attention to any of them. The emo Peter Parker sequence became a particular target of criticism, with many feeling that it was out of character and poorly executed. That's not to say that it wasn't a huge hit, that it was, but audience reaction was notably more negative than the box office had suggested, with many fans expressing disappointment at the film's handling of beloved characters like Venom. The success was largely attributed to franchise momentum and curiosity rather than genuine enthusiasm for the final product. Ultimately, it disappointed not because it lacked ideas, but because it refused to choose among them. Typically, you're advised to cut things as you write. Here, it's like they just added more and more to the detriment of the overall movie. The movie, Roger Ebert wrote, quote, is, in short, a mess. Too many villains, too many pale plot strands, too many romantic misunderstandings, too many conversations, too many street crowds looking high into the air and shouting, ooh, that way, then swiveling around and shouting, ah, that way, end quote. It was a movie that had a lot of interesting concepts, but the sum of the parts was, unfortunately, a disappointment. While it's been reevaluated in the years since, I'm not sure that it moves the scale that much. 1977's Alien, directed by Ridley Scott, is a masterpiece. It's a near-perfect movie that blends cosmic horror and claustrophobic tension that abides by the old adage of less is more and leaves viewers thinking. It was a sensation on its release, cleaning up with critics and at the box office. This is also one of the few films that got a sequel from a different director that also turned out to be pretty good. James Cameron's Aliens, released a decade later, brought back Sigourney Weaver, but as opposed to being a horror play like Scott's, it leaned more into the action that Cameron would become well known for. It was also a great film and one of the best sequels ever made. And then the movies hit a roadblock. To be sure, they kept going because they made bank at the box office. But for more than 2 decades, returns to the franchise would be, for lack of a better word, disappointing. There was Alien 3 in 1992, directed by David Fincher. Instead of waxing poetic about the critical and commercial and whatnot of the movie, I'm just going to quote Fincher on this one. In a 2009 interview with the BFI, he said, quote, "I had to work on it for 2 years, got fired off it 3 times, and I had to fight for every single thing. No one hated it more than me. To this day, no one hates it more than me," end quote. There's just no trusting that one up. Then there was 1997's Alien Resurrection, directed by Jean-Pierre Jeunet. It was set hundreds of years after Alien 3 with a clone of Ellen Ripley. Experiments are done, aliens get loose, and people get wrecked. By this point, the movies were getting tired. Scott and Cameron had already created the insurmountable entries in the series, and everything else just had a whiff of cash grab. At least the Alien vs. Predator films in 2004 and 2007 respectively added a new spin. They brought together 2 legendary monsters to duke it out. The films were fantastic in their own way, though perhaps the concept was more entertaining than the execution. All this is to say that when Ridley Scott announced that he was working on Prometheus, people were excited. Scott made Alien at the start of his film career. By now, he was a master of the craft and well respected. Him returning to the universe was like Lucas returning to Star Wars. It turns out that the reception to the return was similar, at least on release. Now, to be fair, I thought that Prometheus was a pretty good film on its release and I really enjoy it. It got solid reviews from critics and decent enough reviews from audiences, earning praise for the visual design, themes, and performances, especially Michael Fassbender's android, David. Alas, when measured against the excitement it generated, it fell well short. It felt more like a part 1 as opposed to a contained movie unto itself. Which makes sense, as before the release Scott implied that there would be more movies that picked up where it left off. While a commercial success, it failed to deliver the elements that one might have expected for Ridley Scott's return: plenty of tension, decent horror elements, and a tight story. The word of mouth impacted Alien Covenant several years later, which suffered a steep box office decline. Visual spectacle moves someone like me quite a bit, and I found the ambition satisfying, but for many, it had fundamental storytelling issues. Alien Romulus, however, which Scott handed over to Fede Alvarez, seems to be more of a return to form for the franchise. It was a critical and commercial hit, and I hope that continues.